Good morning. I am recording this on a morning, so I'm sorry it's taking so long to get a new one posted, but we've had some activities going on around here. For instance, we had Learning Day last week, and I found out sort of the last moment, the week before, that I was going to be doing a presentation. So I had to spend time working on a presentation to do last week, and that delayed my getting this taken care of. I was supposed to have done it then. So we're going to be talking about your reading so far. We're going to be talking about the upcoming essay that's due in a couple of days. I actually have, the essay will be available until the 26th, which is Monday. I originally had the due date as the 24th. It still shows the 24th, but you actually have a couple of days leeway to get this submitted. I originally had it as the 24th because I had other classes that were turning in essays also, so I was trying to stagger them a little bit. But the dual credit students who were supposed to be working on an essay and getting that ready to turn in are not in class because today we're having dual credit celebration day. So I'm not meeting with those students, and we've had to push off their essay by a couple of days. So that gives you a couple of days extra as well. So apologize for the delay on that one. But as we look at this, of course, when you go to the modules, you have the course schedule. And so currently what we're looking at, you've gone through hopefully the materials of the Native American literature, the colonial background. You've been doing some reading from as it says here, the emerging idea of America for this week with Jefferson, Thomas Paine, John Adams. You have Equiano, who writes one of the first slave narratives. And in those readings, what you've been, hopefully you've been recognizing, and also through the other modules, let me go back to that one, you hopefully have been reading over some of the details, for instance, with the Native American literature. Not only do we have the ones that are in the textbook, which would be here, and again, accessing the textbook is through the Norton resources. You have the oral tradition, the details that are offered there. And again, clicking on these give you some of the backgrounds. One of the major parts, of course, is that the oral tradition is how the tales that we have were transmitted from one generation to the next. Not until we're the 19th century that you start having any of these written down in an orally fashion, really. And it says here the Native American creation stories serve Native cultures, helping them to look at the world, what life is, how to understand it. The trickster tale, and I have you some details about that, being a cultural hero, creator and destroyer at one time. And so when you look at these details here, and hopefully you looked at the notes, and the details are offered here. This is a little video that goes into some of those. This is about the creation myths, again, another video that hopefully you looked at. And then I have the notes that I typed up for you, where it talks about the oral tradition being a defining element. That in this one they are offering comments about the world as they see it. As it says here, wasn't really recognized by Western scholars until the late 1800s, the 19th century. And what they do offer in this one is a worldview. As it says down here, they're identifying the Native Americans as a communal, inclusive access. The individual self only understood in relation to the larger community. That the telling of the stories, the key aspects here, and this is from Bruchac, his views, that they are teaching a moral lesson, conveying information about the world. When you say the world, we mean the natural world. This idea that's why it's so important when you go through the readings that you recognize that animals are really a key figure throughout. As it says here, this idea that the stories help us see life-sustaining lessons about greed, which would be a negative. The wisdom of elders, a positive. The need for management of the world, not killing everything, but just taking what is needed. So the focus is about nature, the physical world, sense of appropriate behavior within that world, and also then about human nature and issues of good and evil, all part of that they see around them. It goes on and talks about the ecocentric view that they have. That again, as I was just commenting, the animals and humans are interchangeable. That you have a great deal of focus about animals as part of the creation, conveying, as this Bruckner's comments here say, insight and wisdom to help us become better as humans. And again, they use metaphors. Everything is representing something else. Again, here's a comment about the trickster figure that was also in your reading that I point out. And the sense of repetition being important, where lines are repeated, focus is being created through those. It becomes a really engaging aspect. And this is something that the European, we'll call colonists, some were not really trying to seek to colonize, didn't quite understand. And so they didn't recognize all these details. As it says here, is not a attitude typically seen in Western European literature. This the particular view of how the world is and how man needs to fit into the world. And so hopefully you read through those notes and looked through those. And you have the PowerPoints. These are from the publisher, and they just go over some key points. This is actually from the 9th edition. I was going to post the 10th edition. They're not any different. But you have the quotes from certain people, Hernando Cortez, and this is a quote that when you look at the essay topic, this is one I used. Champlain's views, saying that that the victory, that the individuals come in and take over, they call it is not because it's too furious, it slays too many men. You have Heckfelder, who comes in. This is part of the along the Northern American eastern coast area. This idea that white and red men lived together for a long time, but the red men, as he's calling them, started seeing that the white men wanted more and more land until they wanted all of the country, and that's what happened. Bradford and Winslow. Bradford's part of what you're reading now, or have read for last week. This idea that this attack that took place, and this idea about providence of God that took place, and this view that maybe they weren't as religious, although there is some. This is Harry, and then here's John Smith, of course, and his storylines. He had the topic on one of the study questions about how dramatic he was. The idea about part of that English theatricality, where everything gets expanded and gets exaggerated. Again, he was a soldier, an experienced individual, an older man. He was not a young man when he came to the New World. He had gone through a number of battles. So when he writes about this, he's trying to come across as sort of this strong, valiant figure. And so that was what that one was about. The other, again, this is also more PowerPoint. Again, I was going to post the 10th edition. They were the same as the 9th, so I didn't see the point trying to replace. This is from a quote from one of the chieftains. It says that, talking to them, you went back to old time, told us you had been in possession of the province of Maryland above 100 years. What is 100 years in comparison to the length of time since our claim? And that was how they started looking at it, because that view, as they're taking out, this is Pontiac, and you have the quote here about the Great Spirit speaking to them. I am the maker of mankind. Because I love you, you must do my will. Remember the earlier quote in the previous PowerPoint where the comment was made about that the natives did not seem to have much of a religion, and that therefore they need to have this, the Christian religion given to them. Well, here you have an expression of a religious view, and the idea that the trees, the lakes, the rivers, all things, the earth, all given, and they must, the children of the Maker must do His will. And so this is a key aspect that we see. Yes, they had a religion. They had a view. They had an attitude. And this is really not far off, if you will, from the Christian perspective. And he goes on and talks about, that Delaware Indian wanted to learn wisdom from the Master of Life, seeking to find it. So he resorted to fasting, dreaming, and by these means it was revealed to him that moving forward in a straight, undeviating course, he would reach the abode of the Great Spirit. Again, very much in line of a religious attitude. So the European view that the Native Americans did not have a religion, or that their religion was counter, really doesn't hold up when we look at this. And again, this view about man being part of nature and being attuned to everything else. And so this is part of this aspect. And this is Tecumseh, who says, the white men are not friends. They only ask for land. Now nothing will satisfy them. This sort of the Native Americans' view, when they see what it is that the Europeans are doing and how the Europeans view everything, really creates a different attitude and view. And then you have a Cherokee commentary to Benjamin Franklin. This idea about wanting to speak and talk. And that, again, this is the idea of a female perspective. We don't always think of the women of the Native Americans having a major role, but they did. They really did. And whenever you look at any hunting and gathering, and the Native Americans, of course, did have that hunting and gathering background, women were always a key figure, really so. So this is the Cherokee women writing and offering a view to understand. And so this is a key aspect where we start seeing that the Native Americans really were attuned to their world and were paying attention to what was taking place and what they wanted to have done. This is also a document of view, some notes I typed up for you about the traditions. N. Scott Momaday, Native American author of the 20th century, and it offers this idea about the view, about what unites the culture and how they're part of it. That myth becomes history, becomes memoir, becomes myth. That it all circles around everything. And so you have this idea, I'm going to zoom this up just a little bit so you can see a little bit better, that this part is a key idea of how everything is fit into it. That the works are part of their heritage and reflects their views and shows who they are. That this view that the Native Americans define themselves not primarily as Native Americans, but members of a specific tribe. And that was one of the issues. The Europeans come in, they want to put everybody together into one. And that's not the case. There are distinct cultures. There are distinct people. Just as in Europe, you would not, we call them the Europeans, but they have very distinct personalities and nationalities and cultures. The French, the German, the English, those are all separate. The Spanish, the Portuguese, those have very strong identifications as individual cultures. Well, the Europeans, put them all together again, coming into the New World, took all the Native Americans and said, they're all in this one group, and they weren't. You have very different and distinct attitudes and views. As it says here, communities within a particular geographic region tend to be culturally more homologous, and that they're in that region, that's where they are. So one region is different from another region. As you go through this, the stories tend to focus on particular characters. As you go through the ones that you're reading, and again, you have these here that are offered. I'm going to move that ahead to the stories from the beginning of the world. And so you had the Iroquois creation story, the view that it was offering, and what was taking place there. And so you have this story where it talks about the great island, this idea of the large turtle, where they're trying to figure out what they could do and how they could work. And so you have the great darkness, possession of the great monster. The upper world was inhabited by mankind. A woman conceived and would have the twin born. And so she needed to have some aspect, and so they were alarmed by her descending, and so they were trying to figure out what to do, and so the great turtle steps forward and made a proposal. So the turtle executes upon the spot, and a small quantity of earth varnished on the back of part of the turtle. So literally, the turtle increases and becomes an island, and so the woman remained in that. And eventually, of course, the great turtle becomes the earth itself, and so this is what we wind up having. And so you have the details here that are formed, so that literally the great island is created, and they see themselves in this way. And you have the creation of the good mind and the bad mind, good and evil coming through. And you have the twins challenging one another in that way. And so the good mind repaired to the battleground, visited the people, and retired from the earth, where you have that distinction being offered. The Navajo creation story has some details that are a little similar. They talk about the emergence of the people and who they are. And again, what they're looking at in these stories, notice that we have distinct cultures. The Iroquois to the northeast, the Navajo to the southwest. And they're telling their stories that are helping them to see how they fit in. Notice the Iroquois, everything was natural. There was the earth, the individuals, the animals were all part of it. With the Navajo creation story, it says in the beginning there was only darkness. That should, of course, call to mind for many of you. That's how Genesis begins. And eventually you have the distinction between sky and water. It says that sky and water came together by some mysterious holy means. And they have no explanation. It says that that's when everything began. This was the first world, like an island floating in a sea of mist. Just as you have the great island in the Iroquois story, well, they also refer to an island. And again, remember the Navajo are out in the southwest area, a little more desert conditions, but they're still talking about sea, and they're talking about islands. It says there are no people, there were only these, and so you have the spiritual beings. And in case you haven't noticed, in your textbook, when you go through the ebook, if you have anything with like a little number, you can actually put your cursor on it, and it will tell you the definition. So you have some sort of supernatural beings that are existing there. No sun, no moon, no stars, but eventually what's going to happen, this will occur. You're going to have separation of morning and night. You're going to start having the groups of the spiritual beings here, and they're going to be divided into guardians. And so eventually what will happen as the story goes on is that everything will start appearing. You're going to have details, and they're told, go to the west. And again, the development, the building of this. Eventually, a man and a woman lay where the ears of corn had been, that life is produced, and they come out in that way. The first real people, five-fingered beings. And so the first man was given a rock crystal, the symbol of clear thought. The first one was given turquoise, the power of speech. So then they have a pair of twins. Just as the Iroquois, you had twins, now you have twins here. And it says that another pair of twins was born, and so on. 5 pairs of twins, all being born. And so the first man and the first woman are taken away, and they remain there, and their children are taken and kept there for 4 days to the east. So eventually what's going to happen is you have the planting, the growth. You have the planting of corn and other crops. You have the development of the earth rising up to meet the sky reaching down. And so you wind up having beings coming along. And so again, they're trying to explain how the world happens. It's a very natural aspect. They're seeing how man is part of nature. Again, first man and first woman are born out of corn. So natural aspects. And they continue to go on with this one. Hopefully you've read through this already, where you have the details. And you have the old man, meaning the young man, and the old man says he has gathered soil from 7 sacred mountains. I shall give them to you, but can I help you further? So the people turned to the young man and said, I will help you, but you must watch. So the young man sees what he does. He plants and begins to sing. The reeds grow. You wind up having the aspects here. So you have the reed grows quickly, and they lifting the people above the rising water. So everything is part of nature. And again, you start having the animals named as well, the locust, the coyote, the turkey, the coyote being mischief. He's that trickster again. And so as you go through this, the the rock crystal and the turquoise, all these are part of it, and they're named that way. And so again here, the land was rich, the people prospered, but the land soon grew dangerous as you have monsters roaming the land, hunting and eating people. So eventually they took refuge. First man went out to pray. He heard a strange sound like the cries of a baby. He went out to pray. He heard the sounds coming. On the fourth morning, the talking God appeared, instructed him to ascend the mountain, and there he found an infant. The changing woman, the most beloved. He took her home. She reached maturity in only 4 days. Notice use of the 4-day aspect. In 4 days she gave birth to twin boys. Again, twin boys. And so you have born for water and the monster slayer. They rid the land of the monsters. And so once again, you have aspects happen. And then you have the last of the monsters, the giant, killing the people in the sun. And once again, that is confronted and ended. And you have the holy people return to their home, always reaching through songs and prayers. And so, again, always, so long as we remain within these bounds, we will be living the manner that the holy people prescribed for us, following what was needed. A reminder of the sacredness of this land, that they could not abuse the land, they could not take it for granted. That was all part of it. This is what we see within the oral traditions. I'm going to go back here now to the table of contents. If I can get to the table of contents. There it is. Okay. Trying to get to the table of contents. It's always fun. And so when you hopefully went through all these, you have other aspects as well. Those are the trickster tales, how those are used. You have the speeches written and the views as they're trying to understand what their role is and how people are threatening them, what they need to do. And then you have, of course, the Europeans come in, where you have Columbus, right? For instance, I'm just going to go to his fourth letter as he's trying to get that fourth voyage, this letter about the fourth voyage, where he's trying to convey to Ferdinand and Isabella, hey, can you please fund me again? And, this idea about, there's still a need to go. And the comment is that the lands are more extensive and richer than all other Christian lands. And he talks about, working and trying to save and serve. This is about 10 years after the initial voyage. And so he's trying to say that he's trying to come and do these things. That he's seeking. I have become careless of the Christ form of religion. That he is encompassed by a million savages full of cruelty and our foes, separated from the holy sacraments of Holy Church. When he's writing about this, he's now referring to them as savages. He's referring to them as cruel and that they're the foes. Well, if you go back to his other letter, the letter of discovery that was sent when he was coming, he was talking about coming to these areas and reaching this coast and seeing these people. It's a very different comment. He's talking about the Indians, as he called them. Sees he found infinity of small hamlets of people without number. And he sees, the different islands, different aspects, and says they were very fertile, that everything is beautiful. I saw them as green and lovely, that there are different kinds of palm trees, other fruits and plants and trees, and there's honey and cultivatable lands, that everything is arable, means they can plant and grow things, that there are many rivers, great and good waters, and the majority containing gold. Well, that's not really the case. There are great mines of gold and other metals. No, not on the islands where he went. Remember that Columbus never made it to any of the actual mainland of the continents. He only went to islands. But when he writes about the people, he says he sees men and women, that they are not well-built men of handsome nature, not because they are that way, but because they're marvelously timorous, that they're hesitant and calm, and that they tend to be timid among the Europeans. Well, that differs from what he was writing 10 years later when he talks about them being cruel and he's surrounded by savages. In this letter, he says they're not savages. That instead, they never refuse anything which they possess if it be asked of them. They invite anyone to share. They display as much love that they give willingly. That that these are people who can conceive affection and extend that affection. And all this is how he sees them. That these are what these people are like. That they're not cruel, as he calls later, but instead they're accepting and open and willing to share whatever that they have with those who are coming in. And then down here it says all men are content, that there is no human monstrosities, the whole population being well formed, that they are a good people, that there are some who are regarded as fierce and eat humans, but he doesn't really see those. Other than that, he says some of these are ferocious among other people, but who are cowardly, but I make no account of them than the rest. That there really is anything to worry about these people because of the way he has found them, that instead they are all open and sharing, and that they are individuals that the Europeans will have no difficulty with to achieve refreshment and gain, as it says here. That's a little different from the letter that he sends, of course, 10 years later. And so we have some of these distinct aspects because, of course, what we see is as the Europeans come in, what they're looking for is gain in some way. The Europeans, especially the Spanish and to a certain extent the Portuguese, who are down in South America for the most part, are really coming in looking for monetary gain of some sort, especially gold. He talked about mines of gold in his letter. Really weren't any on the islands, but he was trying to convey, oh no, this is good, keep funding me. They were always trying to get as much as they could, which is what we see with Cortez, later Pizarro, etc., as they come in and really devastate the native population and the cultures, taking whatever they can get. And now, of course, you had de Vaca, who spends time with the people, lives among them, and his view is a little different. His view is that these are people. This is a culture. They have their priorities. They are just as human, if you will, and humane as anyone he has run across in Europe. Which, of course, eventually gets de Vaca into trouble, as some of you comment when you answer the questions about his writings. He eventually is sent home in disgrace and imprisoned because he's not doing what the Spanish want, taking as much as they can get. And so, those are some of the issues. When we get to the North American, which is more for what we're looking at for American literature, and you have the English coming in, establishing a colony. Originally, their priorities were also to try to find as much as they could get. They don't find gold, though. And there's a struggle for quite some time. What happens, and eventually this is going to prove to be the saving of the colony, is cash crops, especially tobacco. What they can grow, dry, and then send and make money from. That becomes important as we're looking for those. With Bradford, and this is some of the readings you were asked to do last week, if you'll call it up, here we go. You have to click. It takes a while to get to this, the way the ebook is set up. William Bradford, of course, is part of the Puritan group that we call the Pilgrims who come over. And they, the idea of religious freedom is part of, that they leave from England. Many of the Puritans had already left England at different times and gone different places. They'd gone into the Netherlands, but because they felt that their children were becoming corrupted by the local Amsterdam population, for instance, they went back to England, not well received by James, and they said, we'll get out of your head. We'll leave. Give us a colony. And so they were given a colony in the New World. They were actually supposed to go to Virginia, where the previous colony had been in 1607, but they missed it. They wound up sailing north and landed in Massachusetts in 1620. We call them pilgrims because they wanted to practice their own religion. That's why we say freedom of religion. But really, they weren't very tolerant of others. They wanted to maintain their own. They talk about the freedom of the gospel here, Bradford does. And so when they come over, they're not that receptive of other people's views. And if you disagreed with them, you typically didn't get to stay around very long. This is, as it says here, this idea about removal. And it talks about some different ones here. You have, this idea that the people generally bore all the difficulties cheerfully. It says that eventually, though, they were forced to be such not only to their servants, but to their dearest children, to being a taskmaster in that way. And so you wind up having, as he says here, they moved there and take the resolution of the removal. And so that's when they unpeopled countries of America. So that's the decision that they made. After having gone to Holland, that's the Netherlands, not where they wanted to be. So they went to the New World. And this is what you have in his letters, talking about their arrival, and they're sailing off, getting everything prepared and going, and being certain that it was God that was leading them that way. And so you have these views and attitudes, as it says here, that the house of God, which you are, be not shaken with unnecessary novelties, that you are becoming a body politic, using amongst yourselves civil government, that, as it says here, to be chosen into the office of government. Let your wisdom and godliness appear by God's ordinance for your good. And so that you know better things at the image of the Lord's power and authority. That's how everything is supposed to be governed and followed through. And so this is what they're looking at in that way. And so, again, I'm going to go back to the table of contents because I want to skip over to parts of this one. Where, again, what you have with Bradford and Robinson's writings are the details. And so you have this idea about the first things. Oh, let's go about the difficult beginnings. We'll go there first. That they had issues. That there was sickness and other challenges to them. That their health was not good. That the calamity fell among the passengers. But this idea of coming through and having to deal with it. That they had compassion on those who were ill. They tried to help them. And so, when people passed away, they were recounting this, dealing with the natives. And again, they use the term Indians, which is what Columbus had called them. And so they had to deal with these. And that they made a peace with him. And that Squanto, remember the idea about what he was going to do, he was a special instrument sent of God for their good, that this is how, they were certain that this is how they were going to survive because God had done this. And so you have the details about Squanto and what he was able to do and how they were able to use what he had taught them. Spring approaching, it pleased God, the mortality began to cease amongst them. The sick and the lame recovered. And so again, everything is related to God and his providence, what he is doing. Everything is built that God is destining these people to succeed. And it becomes an important aspect as they look at this. All right, so you have the first Thanksgiving. So that the harvest was, again, based upon how Squanto had taught them. They were able to do this. This is all summer. There was no want. There was no lack of anything. They actually had food. That besides the waterfowl, they were taught how to fish. There was also wild turkeys and venison. And so you wind up having food for a change. That they were able to survive because they were taught how to hunt. And then you wind up having celebration and views. Some got a little extreme. This is about Marymount. And so you have Mr. Morton, and the idea about some of the different plantations set up. I'm going to move down here. There's a comment that Captain Standish, that's Miles Standish, he said, stopped him, put by his piece, and took him. Nor was there any harm done. Said that one was so drunk he ran his own nose upon the point of a sword. He lost a little of his hot blood. That this was a situation so that Morton had to be brought to Plymouth where he was kept because of the way he had done things. And though he went for England, yet nothing was done to him. So some of the worst company were dispersed, some of the more modest kept the house. But this idea about this Morton had led them to do different things that they didn't need to be doing. So Morton had to be taken by force because how he had acted against God's privileges and actions and what he had done. And so that Morton and his consorts had to be suppressed. Because as it says here, he was a wicked and debauched person and crew, and that he would entertain any, however vile, and all scum of the country, that they all flocked to him. That that's what he was doing, and so this was something that they had to deal with. That there were people among them, and then you start having this idea about prosperity because they were doing well. Remember the first Thanksgiving, there was no want. Well, now they started having prosperity. You start seeing, as it says here, the Christian couple friendship starts dividing. They become caught up into materialistic aspects more so than anything else. And that as such, the comment is that I fear this will be the ruin of New England and will provoke the Lord's displeasure against them. That materialism is going to be the curse, if you will. And so then you start having troubles to the west, which basically is not that far out, but you start having other issues. And so you have some of these that are offered here, where you start having some of the areas in Virginia and to the south and other areas that you start having issues with other culture, the Dutch who were there. And eventually you will have a war between the English and the Dutch, and the English will win. That's how New York becomes a colony of England. Originally it was settled by the Dutch. And so you start having issues. They start having some things with the Indians because a smallpox is a plague for them. They start dying. And it's not pleasant. The description is offered there. It says that, as it says here, the marvelous goodness and prophets of God, not one of the English was so much as sick. And so, again, this is part of what we see when you're looking at these details. And so the idea that the English are there for just religious purposes, no, they're also there trying to make money. And they get caught up in that aspect, where they're trying to really make a sense of prosperity as part of it. And you have Morton offering his views and some of his concepts, and again with Winthrop and his views, the Psalm book where they're trying to record. But Roger Williams, key figure, where again, as I said, the Puritans would come in, what we think of as Plymouth. They're therefore practicing their religion. They're not tolerant of others. When Roger Williams objects to some of the governmental aspects of the Pilgrims, when he objects to some of what they're doing, he and his followers are kicked out. As it says here, he was spreading opinions considered dangerous. So he literally was banished. And the idea was that he and anybody who wanted to side with him when they were banished would be sent out to the wilderness, and the thought would be that, well, they'll just die out there. Rather, Williams wound up going off. They were able to entrench themselves to an area. They wound up building homes. They wound up settling an area. They sent off for and received a royal charter, and that's Rhode Island. And so you have, as it says here, built relationship with the indigenous leaders, with the natives. And so you wind up having some detail where he actually meets with people. And so you have this one where he's, as they call him a polemicist, where he sort of goes out to the edges, that he would not hesitate to attack views and why he felt was wrong. And so challenging foundational assumptions, and he did. And so when he is there, it says he infuriated and threatened the leaders of Massachusetts. As I said, he was literally removed and sent away. And so you have those that they wanted to banish him from the Commonwealth because his ideas and opinions were dangerous. They wanted to send him to England, but instead he wound up being banished and sent into Rhode Island. And so you have this idea that they did not cite his attitude among the American Indians, the Native Americans, in their charges. His view was, his sole desire was to do the natives good. This idea about not necessarily assimilate into their culture, but seeing them as no better or worse than English rogues who dealt with them. I did that. That's how he felt about the ones who were dealing with him. That there is no difference. Anyone not regenerate was outside the people of God. To refer to the American Indians as heathens was improperly sinful and unchristianly. That he was looking at the natives that he encountered as individuals. He didn't want to become one of them because he had his own background and culture, but he saw them as being individuals also who had their own culture. And the idea that this is missionary work. To view the Native Americans as heathen was wrong, he felt. It was very different in the views and attitudes. I'm going to go back here. Because this is part of what we see with the Native American culture, that they were looking at their view and attitudes, that they're trying to show us in their stories who each one was and what they were. So hopefully you had a chance to go through all those. And again, in the colonial areas, I give you some lecture notes over Bradford, a little bit more there about who he was and what he did. So you have some biography here and some of the key points that he saw and how he wrote, and what he tried to do, that war between Spain and the Dutch would result in problems, that the licentious Dutch life he felt was wrong, and so you start having that view there that they were trying to keep. And it goes into some details that the farmland around Plymouth was not very good. Eventually they do recognize it and they start growing more. In fact, up in the area that they were, it just is a little rocky. It's not rich. They had to do something else and go someplace else, really, to go outside of the Plymouth area to find arable land. Because unlike what Columbus wrote in his letter that all the land was arable, could be farmed, no. It wasn't quite that way. And so you have some other details here where he offers you what life was like and idea about why he wrote it, what he was hoping to do. And so that he writes this so that, again, it's after they've been there, where he's trying to share what took place and how long it took them to really get established. It says here, tries to give a history of this, to let people know what they were doing, what they had to do to get there. And of course, the attribution is always about God and how God helped them achieve. Despite the problems, despite the issues, God was there. As it says here, God's plan is present in everything that they were doing. And so this was a key aspect as they looked at it. I'll go to the next part because I had other ones about Rowlandson. This was what you were covering last week, and hopefully you looked over the PowerPoint. You're supposed to be able to hear it, but I apologize because quite often what happens when it's in Canvas, the sound doesn't record. Rather, you have to download it, and then it's supposed to play. Let me see if it does. And sometimes the yes. So you actually had to download it if you want to listen to my comments. And I apologize I didn't mention that to you. I go over the details here, a little bit more background on him and what was taking place, and why he writes it and how he writes it. And then I get into Rowlandson, one of the interesting figures, because she comes over. Her father was a very wealthy individual. She marries Joseph Rowlandson, and there's an Indian attack during this time, and she is kidnapped. So that the Indians tend to capture her, and so she is left, kept prisoner for 3 months, and she's forced to go different places. She's wounded, but she eventually recovers, and she meets King Philip, the leader. That's the name given to the leader of the particular tribe of Native Americans that they were dealing with. She was finally ransomed back, and she wrote an account of what happened while she was there. And this is what you were asked to read parts of. And it was eventually published in Boston, 1720. And so you have her offering the views. She's not credited as the American genre knows the Indian captivity narrative, but we do have quite a number of those later published. But she tries to give us, the situation, what she has. It's a stereotype, though, of the Native Americans, the brutality of the situation, that about how she was treated, what she observed. She stereotypes Indians as liars, compares them to Satan, as opposed to the lovely faces of the Christians. So it's, this view is that distinct aspect where they are the bloody heathens. Now, think about what Roger Williams said. Call the American Indians, as it says there, heathens, is unchristianly. Well, Rowlandson keeps it up. She reinforces that image, and it doesn't work too well because, as it says, her comments reinforce the desire to, again, remove them. Just remove them from it. It's that attitude that the colonists had. The colonists, as I mentioned earlier, have come originally for we think of the Pilgrims as being there for freedom of religion, but more so than anything, they're there to prosper. They're there to establish themselves and to eventually become capitalistic. And the tobacco and other crops, especially tobacco, aids them in that way. And we have the comments from Bradford where he says, this is going to be the ruin of our colony, because you start having, people suddenly, instead of everybody working together in the sense of trying to be communal, you have separations where you are going to have the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Well, this becomes part of this attitude and the view of the Native Americans who see themselves, as I said earlier, and in the notes comment, as not the individual, but the individual within the community. There's a very distinct philosophy between these two cultures, and that's going to cause some of the major issues. The first thing is to speak to her, she will not be heard if she comes with him. Not quite how she describes him. It's tempered by the kindness of her master, promises to throw her back to her husband. The other squaws who feed her. Remember, she is not tortured, she's not beaten, she's not raped. Um, she becomes a seamstress. She sews for them, and they repay her for that. So it's a very different view and attitude from some of the recounting that's there. And so we have to keep that in mind. It says here, it shows us some of this Puritan theology. That God's providence preserved the Indians, that she's preserved, still turning his hand against them, the Lord feeds and nourishes them to be a scourge. It's a very different attitude and view. And again, this doesn't, I'm sorry you can't read that well, I probably need to change that color. That she sees herself as a good Christian, but she does display what is decidedly unchristian sentiments when you go through it. But that's because she's a product of her society. What Williams objected to among the Pilgrims, among that Massachusetts Bay Colony, that led to his being banished, are some of those views. That they are the right, they were in the right, and therefore God is leading them, and they do not need to do anything else. It says, they were facing challenges, though. They were having to deal with something. And that her narrative shows what they can depend upon, faith in God. And that, these show us insights. They help us to see these things, the emotions, the issues that they were facing. And so hopefully that helps you in going through. Again, I apologize. The vocal doesn't come through if you're just looking at it through Canvas. You have to download and listen to my comments in that way. Again, I have some other aspects for you, some videos. Hopefully you had a chance to watch some of those. I did post a commentary over the first essay, and again, this was a video that was done. Hopefully you watched that. We'll close that one though. And let me go back here. And we want to look at this first essay topic. Let me get down here. The essays are always under their own, as I went over in the opening video, the welcome video. These modules are used to extend your readings. For instance, this one gives you some more detail about Smith and Bradford. As I said, that's what that one was for. This one picks up and gives you a little bit more over Jonathan Edwards, Benjamin Franklin, Equiano. And we haven't got to these other ones yet. You're getting to Fresnel and Wheatley soon. But that's what those are for. And then so down here, these are all in, as you go through your reading, again, course materials, click on this part, it'll open up that one. Then you can go to the contents, as I have here. And again, find the reading. It gets a little confusing. Originally, they didn't even have the page numbers. They just had the readings listed. And they still make you a little confusing. For instance, let's go down here to readings that you did for this past week. Let's go to Equiano. I'm trying to find Equiano. Yeah, John Adams. We have John Adams and Thomas Paine, Jefferson. These are all part. Here's Equiano. That's what I was trying to find. Equiano. Originally, they didn't have the page numbers on it. You could go here and do a search and type in Equiano. And it didn't have page numbers until you got to this. And notice that they're putting both the full edition, which is what we have as inclusive access. They have a shorter edition, which cuts out some of the background material, cuts out some of the reading. As you can see, it goes from $6.50 in the full edition to $3.39 in the shorter edition. Originally, I didn't have the page numbers until you clicked on Equiano, and then the page numbers appeared. But Equiano is individual. Give the name of Gustavus Vasa, who writes and eventually goes back to England, and in London has his publication. And he writes about his life in this new world, what has happened to him. It says here he did not define himself as African American, nor Anglo-African. but instead he was an individual. As you'll note here, probably born in Nigeria, we think. Was called Igbo. Again, if you look into the history, you have Igbo, you have other different ones, Benin, in that same area. Sold to British slavers, taken to the Indies first, and then eventually sold up to Virginia. There has been some questions. It says recent scholarship, as they're looking into this background, there have been raised issues that maybe he was actually born in the New World, that he was born on a Carolina plantation, that he was not raised in Africa early and then sold. There's issues that has been brought up. But again, what he does offer is a view, a first-person account of life in the New World for those who were slaves. And eventually gained his liberty because he was able to purchase it. He was able to be given money, and he used that to purchase his freedom. And he had intended on going to London. He winds up, though, traveling in different places and writes about his life, and that's what you have here. And so it's one of those situations that if we look at this, you have the details, and as I said, when you go to here, you have the outline, the overviews that your book gives you, and then when you go here, I have some further information, trying to give you some background details for you. And that's what these modules are for. The readings up here, right there. And then you go to these modules, as it says here, to space out and give more information about what you have read. So the essay topics, and we're going to look at essay 1. And hopefully it's opening. There we go. Ask you to consider certain points. Details, you're going to be looking at the attitudes and perspectives of Native Americans, comparing those views and perspectives and understandings of themselves in the world to the European who were coming in as the colonials, the colonists, to a certain extent, in not so much in North America, but definitely in Mesoamerica, the conquistadors, the conquerors. So I ask you to consider certain views: man and his world, man and nature, man and others, and man toward God. And so I ask you to consider some key points. You're supposed to, of course, correct grammar, mechanics, usage, all those aspects of good writing. You're following the MLA guidelines, where you have proper spacing, that's double spacing. You're going to have proper tabbing over for paragraphs. You're going to have citations within your essays you quote from works, works cited page for those. And I ask you to consider 3 major points. Native American cultures. Although they are different in a number of ways, they each seem to show this view about nature, the Great Spirit, as we quoted from the earlier works that we looked at. You have Lakota, which is in the plains area, offer this view that man must be born or reborn to belong. That in the Indian is the spirit of the land. That the Indian, the Native American, is akin to all living things. And that everything of earth is loved and reverenced. And so that sort of reflects a view then about man and his world. The Iroquois and Navajo perspectives also, talking about that one. We looked at that idea. The Puritans come in, they see something a little different. They see, as we were just talking about, that need for faith in God that Mary Rowlandson's narrative sort of emphasizes. This view, as Bradford writes about, that God has provided for them. Squanto showing up is, the instrument of God, that God sent Squanto. It wasn't because he was a good person in the sense of he wants to help out others, It's that God put in there, that they were the chosen by God to enjoy this, that their ability to master situations show their evidence to be among the elect, that whether they were or not they couldn't really know, but purify their own lives of society. That's what they were trying to do, trying to push forward and reshape the world. So if their sufferings and strivings in the world will lead them to that one. That man may not have had free will, but they were to work then for their God to make the world better. And then point 3, although it was religious situations separating themselves, others came for other reasons. Spanish explorers seeking riches. Columbus in his letters talks about the land being arable and about the great mines of gold, because he knew that would attract their attention. That they view the people as being barbaric, heathens, as the settlers in Massachusetts refer to them in Rowlandson's comment, that they really didn't worry about understanding these cultures. Remember, Columbus comments about the people being sort of nice and simple people, timid people, that they're always offering goodness. And then in one of his last letters about the fourth voyage, he complains about being surrounded by savages. They're not seeking to know these cultures, because Cortes, and again, here's that quote that was on the PowerPoint, that although these people live almost like those in Spain, in harmony and order, they are barbarous and are so far from the knowledge of God. It's remarkable to see how they could achieve this. This is the view. How are they able to do this? They're not like us, although they're living just about like us. Well, it's that mindset that we see. They're not trying to understand others. They're not trying to get along with them. Remember what Williams wrote about the Massachusetts Bay Colony's views, where he disagreed with them, that to regard the American Indians, his term, as heathens is unchristianly, again his term, that that's not how they were to be, that they are a culture, they are a people, and he saw it as an opportunity to be a missionary, show them the love of God and convert them, but they are people also, with their ordered civilization. Jamestown, 1607, in case you weren't aware, they were mostly business people. It says, James I sent them there with the idea that you go find gold too. Just because Spain was getting all this and the English weren't. They didn't find gold, but what they did come up with were cash crops, like tobacco. And it became, as it says here, the money crop, and money flowed in. And that spread to the other areas. So by 1630, 1640, 1650, Bradford's writing in his history of the Plymouth Plantation about how the separation is occurring, how the erosion, if you will, of the community within the plantation is occurring because people start latching on to making money. And this is a quote from a book called Alvar Pass. Recall Degler says, capitalism came in the first ship. And so what I want you to do for your essay, you can use these listed points. You don't have to discuss all of those, but think of those points. And I want you to discuss the perspective that the Native Americans held as opposed to the early American settlers, the Europeans, in regard to man and the world. You can consider nature. You can consider God, divinity, because again, the Native Americans had divinity, the Great Spirit. Work ethic, how the Native Americans viewed what was supposed to take place within the community as opposed to what the Europeans did. And then the idea about capitalism, monetary gain, and how that helped to push, if you will, the New World. So you're going to be looking at those. Look at the readings. Go back through what you were asked to read, and you can use the notes that I've provided. You can use the PowerPoints that are offered from Norton as well. Do not go to outside sources. Just use the ones that I've given you. You're to cite the material, and you're going to build your essay accordingly then, where you discuss. And again, you don't necessarily have to discuss all 4 of these. If you want to focus on one or two, you can do that. But I do want to see the comparison of the Native American view as opposed to what we are calling the early American settler view. That view of the European colonists as they come in and start building a world. And I want you to make sure that you discuss how those differ, and you can look at the attitudes and views that come through. Go back down to that one. So this is the first essay assignment, and again, you have through the 26th. I know some of you are probably already working on it, so hopefully this will clarify some of the details. In case you haven't looked, this is a chapter study plan that Norton gives you. It says here's what you should do. Read the period introductions, look at that overview, review the timeline, look at the making connections sections, and all sorts of details there that you can look at, because those are all part of the details here. They also give you this one. This again is straight from Norton, where it talks a little bit about writing about the American literature. And so it goes into some details such as developing your thesis. And for a good thesis, the idea about making a claim, where you're going to offer a view about the difference between the Native American perspective and the early American settler perspective, those views. Unfortunately, what they do here, they refer to works that are not part of our course. They're referring to like the Joy Luck Club, Sarah Orange Jewett short stories. Those are in 2328, so a little different. What they do offer here is about, and I'm going to try to get this moved over just a little bit if I can. There we go. So you can see this a little bit more. They talk about writing about American literature in this one, the details here, academic writing, what that is, making sure you develop your views well, going through and finding quotes, text that you can use. And again, the examples that they provide for this are from 2328. But what you want to do is look at the concepts and details and themes, taking a stance. Again, that's what I'm asking you to do. Consider the Native American perspective and philosophy, if you will, compared to the European settler philosophy and perspective. And so you have those that are offered. They offer, again, on this one, textual analysis that you're going to draw from it. And again, they really don't offer much from our textbook. They refer to SLA dying instead. So you want to make sure, though, that you are going through and looking at the text, drawing some information, details that you can use. And again, the examples that they provide are from the 2328 course. They do offer Winthrop's Model Christian Charity. They do have that, but they're asking you to compare it to I Have a Dream, which is in 2328. Again, we're not covering I Have a Dream in this course. So these are some aspects, questions you can look at and think about the views and concepts there that are offered. And looking at some of the key points and looking at the prompts and details. Didn't want to move. Reading critically, what you want to make sure that you do as you go through the ideas, looking at the materials such as Iroquois and Navajo stories, looking at the writings of Bradford or Rowlandson, or looking at Thomas Paine's comments about the world. Jefferson's not so much per se, but some of the other ones, and how they're looking at the situation, bringing those in. That's what you want to do as you go critically through the work, and looking at those attitudes and views. And again, brainstorming and free writing, different ways that you can do your pre-writing aspects, developing your ideas, looking at the topic that's given, keeping it focused, looking at the views and details, just sort of going over some of the details about writing in general. It's not necessarily just about American Lit. we are going to get ready to do the research paper. I postponed giving you any details about that because I wanted to wait till after this first essay was written. I didn't want to cloud you with too much. But you are going to be looking at primary sources and some secondary sources that I've posted for you. And so you want to make sure that you're reading through those and looking at the details and taking notes from those that you can use. And then making sure that you do, as it says here, keep track of the sources, what you've used, and citing. You want to make sure that you give credit for those sources. And then that goes back to the developing part. So I'm going to go back here. And so they offer you those views that you can look at. That'll hopefully help you with some of those. Again, some of the details that you have for this essay topic. I'm going to try to get that open again. It didn't want to click it open. Okay, here we go. Give it a moment. Is that you are looking at the Native American creation myths and colonial settlers. So you're looking at the Native American perspective about themselves and their world as opposed to the European colonial settlers, how they are viewing themselves and this new world that they are in. So you want to look at those. And that's what you're going to focus on. You want to draw from the readings. You want to make sure you look at the ideas. I've tried to go over some of those for you now. And again, I try to give you some key points to think about. You don't have to necessarily cover all three of these points, nor do you have to cover all the bulleted aspects here. Nature, God, divinity, work ethic, capitalism. But you probably should look at these because these really help to highlight some of the differences among the Native American cultures, the European cultures, as they come in and settle. So hopefully this is going to help you with this. I'm going to get this posted. I'll send you a note saying this is posted, and I'm going to post it, bear with me, I'm going to post it under the, I'm trying to think of the best place to probably be to post it here under the essay topic. I used to have, at one time I had a module of just the essays, and I can do it here. I'll put it on the overview notes here and post it here for you. So I'll send you a note saying that's where it is. Again, hopefully you've already done your reading and start doing some planning. Hopefully this will help clarify some of the other expectations for the essay, and I look forward to reading those.